All right, let's watch this video. I think it's time, okay? The T-34, the greatest tank of World War II by Megaprojects, which, by the way, Megaprojects, like, this channel is about, like, Megaprojects, right? It's about, like, cool, like, really big, cool things that are built, right? Like, why are they talking about history? Why are they dipping their balls in the sulfuric acid that is World War II tank history? Funny bald man. Yeah, this guy, I've also seen this guy on a lot of other channels. Like, apparently he is, like, a narrator for a lot of different channels that all kind of do the same thing. So I question his loyalty. I promise that I will pause and give my take decently. We're not just going to rip this guy's video. I know that actually on YouTube right now there's a lot of drama about React content. We're going to try to stay true.
But we're also going to discuss another tank, one that was dismissed as a total lemon, a blob of
a lemon,
and a death trap.
Dismissed as a total lemon. I like that phrase. I'm going to start using that.
The first tank that we're going to talk about is, of course, the T-34 medium tank, and the second tank we're referring to
is also the T-34.
Well, it's also the T-34.
He's so funny and clever. Did you see that? He said it twice.
History buffs either love it or hate it, but they certainly can't ignore it. So let's explore together the history of this tank and find out if the T-34 was in fact a hunk of junk, a savior of the motherlands, or somehow, maybe it was both.
Yes. I don't know why that's such a revolutionary concept for people to grasp about, like, what? A tank is both good and bad? What? Like, it either has to be the best or the worst. I don't get that.
Intervention in the Spanish Civil War, where they had shown their vulnerabilities.
What? What was that edit? What? What just happened?
Where they had shown...
Yeah, man, the tank did a jump. Like, that's cool. For those of you wondering, this clip set the world record for the longest jump ever made in a tank, if I'm not mistaken, and it held that record for quite a while. The reason they did this sort of thing was, if you look back at a lot of old footage of BT tanks, it's them doing shit like this, like jumping over rivers and stuff during an offensive. If a bridge was blown out, they could just jump the tanks across the river. Like, that was genuinely the doctrinal purpose for why the fuck does a tank need to go so fast that it can jump.
Where they had shown their vulnerabilities in an urban warfare setting, especially against opponents using guerrilla tactics. Paradoxically,
Molotovs thrown from balconies was a huge problem.
Or easy prey to light infantry weapons such as petrol bombs, especially if hurled from the top of a building.
I don't know if he mentioned it or if I missed it or if he's going to, but it is also important to note that during the Spanish Civil War, there was also anti-tank guns, like towed anti-tank guns, were a massive problem in the Spanish Civil War. I do think they're actually gonna get into the genuine history of the T-34. I'm quite interested to see how detailed it is. But if they're gonna talk about BT-20, A-20, A-32, and whatnot, they should get into the fact that the armor increase comes from that. The Spanish Civil War showed them that their tanks didn't have enough firepower and didn't have enough armor.
The design specifications were the new vehicle to have a 400 horsepower diesel engine, 20 to 25
the V2, baby,
armor, and a 45 to 75 millimeter gun, which could be
45 to 75 millimeter gun. Is not accurate. After the Spanish Civil War, the ABTU put out requirements that all tanks going forward be outfitted with a 76 millimeter gun. The Soviet Union does this a lot, where, like, the ABTU very early on said, like, we don't want the 45. Every tank going forward should have the 76. But there were still a lot of designs since they made that announcement that, like, just randomly had a 45 in it. And even when the T-34 entered full production of the F-34 76 millimeter gun was in such disarray that they were prepared to stick the old 45 into the T-34 and use that, like, during the initial mass production until they could get the F-34 sorted out.
In March 1938, Koshkin,
amongst a lot of other things,
first design called the BT-20.
Woo! BT-20!
This system allowed for the tracks to be removed from the tank when traveling on roads, which helped to preserve the integrity of the tracks for when they were most needed, but this also made the suspension far more complex and very expensive to assemble.
It wasn't that the suspension itself was complex, it was the fact that you had to figure out the whole conversion, because when you take the tracks off, you need to deliver power to your wheels. The original BTs, I talked about this in my reading comments video, the rear sprocket and the rear road wheel both had, like, toothy gears behind them, and you would connect the two by wrapping a chain around both gears. And so then when the sprocket spun, it drove that chain, which then spun the rear road wheel. By the time of BT-7, it was an integrated system where they had all the gears and mechanisms, like, in the road wheels, in the sprockets, like, all prepackaged. And all you had to do was you took, like, a little hubcap, and you would bolt that hubcap onto the rear road wheel, and that would, like, engage it with all the complicated mechanisms inside. But, like, the suspension itself, it was still just Christie's suspension. But yes, it was more complicated, and it was I mean, later on, don't know if they'll say, but later on they do convince the ABTU that, like, hey, this whole convertible tank thing is not, like, It's not worth it.
May of 1938, the Defense Committee gave KB-24 permission to design 2 tank prototypes, one with the wheel and track system and one without it.
I believe that requirement was set out in March, if I'm not mistaken. Where was he? 1938? Here we go. All this talk came to head on March 14th, 1938. Create 2 types of experimental light tanks. One purely tracked, armed with a 45mm tank gun. Again, so they specify one with a 45, but by this point, the ABTU had already issued their requirements that everything going forward has to have a 76, and yet here you have Pavlov, who is in the ABTU, telling everyone like, give it a 45. So you find this a lot where like the Soviets, they're not on the same page. Like the army, the ABTU, the factories, like nobody's really. The BT-20 project happens because there's all this talk about what the future of Russian tanks should look like, but like nobody's actually doing anything. And then finally, like the ABTU is like, okay, well, let's actually do something. And then they spend all this time on it, and then the army comes back and says, wait, you never asked us what we want. And then the army gives out their own set of requirements, and it's a really complicated thing. Like, everything just gets all stuck up in its own gears. So yeah, so what I think he just said in there, May, this writing came out in March 1938 in a writing by Pavlov. A very minute correction, but, what else am I here for, right? Why else am I doing this reaction if I'm not going to do that?
This was a design for what was now called the A-20. In both versions,
I don't think there was much different between the A-20 and the BT-20. I think it was just a name change. Like, the BT-20 was, like, the idea. But I don't think there was ever a tank built called the BT-20. Like, the BT-20 was the name of the program. It was the idea. But then, yeah, when they actually built it and actually submitted it, by that point they had decided, oh, we're going to change it, now it's the A-20.
Designs were ready by February 1939, and on the 27th of February, the Defense Committee approved the construction of both of these prototypes. So,
yeah, sort of. You're kind of skipping over how much of a nightmare it was to get those things ready by February. Because in March of 1938, they're like, here's the tanks we want, get them ready for testing by 1939. And by February of 1939, they had only just figured out like what the basic blueprint design was going to be.
But its simpler suspension system allowed it to increase the thickness and weight of its armor. The Defense Committee was encouraged by this detail, and in December,
A-32 and A-20 were both built to the exact same specifications. The only difference with the A-32 was that it was going to be non-tracked and then also have the 76. Now, yes, because of the way the A-32 was designed as opposed to the A-20, the A-32 in the future, they realized, could we slap more armor on this? Because then the A-20 was seen as like the viable substitute for the BT, and then the A-32 was like, hey, wait, we actually might be able to do more with this. And then it like the project grew way bigger than it was originally planned.
In December, they commissioned production of 10 track-only prototypes with a 45mm frontal armor. At this stage, the new model was already referred to as the T-34. By February 1940,
I go into it in my video, but yeah, they make it the A-30. They strap more armor to the A-32, and they call that A-34. And then in December of 1939, they issue the requirements for a T-34 tank, which is a A-32 with up armor, thus bringing it up to the A-34 specs, and then adopted as T-34. So, I mean, but yes, by February of 1940, yes, they had decided on the name. But, like, I want to explain the whys. Like, nothing they're really saying here so far is wrong, but I want to go more in detail. I feel like this is a bit too quick, but it's supposed to be 17 minutes, right? They don't need to go too far into it.
Moreover, the interior was super cramped, and the V2 diesel engine failed after just 25 hours of operation.
Yeah, the V2 was a fucking nightmare of an engine to build. It had been in development for almost a decade by the time the T-34 was being put into production. And actually, I found a lot of documents. I didn't include much of this in the T-34 video, but I found a lot of documents of like internal memos with the government and ABTU and the factories and everything. And at one point, like the government starts accusing factory members of sabotaging, because like they're literally like, how the fuck have we been working on this engine for so long and it still sucks? Somebody has to be like doing something. Like they start accusing people of like, somebody has to be sabotaging this, which I found quite funny. I don't remember who it was they accused. They name dropped somebody. They were like, we believe this person is sabotaging the efforts, and for all I know, that guy died a month later.
On March the 6th, they set off from Kharkov to Moscow, covering the distance in 10 days.
Hey, the famous march.
The T-34s were inspected by Stalin himself. Certainly, that's going to be a nerve-wracking ordeal for Koshkin.
Yeah.
But the dictator
Great edit.
was
Awesome,
pleased,
hilarious,
so
totally
tanks
not
moved to the
cringe
next
edit.
stage of tests. At an army training ground, the T-34s were shot at with 37mm and 45mm anti-tank guns, taking very little damage.
That's not the right photos for that. If they're using these photos for those tests, those are not the correct photos of those tests. Hold on. Yeah, and a fun fact: the range that they shot at these T-34s at was Kublinka, the NIBT proving grounds in Kublinka. Chat, what have you done? Which one of you stole my T-34 photos? I know it was one of yous. Sorry guys, it's taking me way too long to find these. So there's one. So this is the real photo of them shooting, because they shot it twice with a 45 and twice with a 37. So this is the real photo of the trials at the NIBT proving grounds. This photo, whatever image they're using here, this is not very pedantic detail. I don't think their editor I just don't think their editor cares. But I thought that was important to note.
Meter and 45mm anti-tank guns taking very little damage. Then on June the 7th, 1940, the Soviet Council of People's
very little damage. They did jam the turret ring and sent shrapnel into the dummy commander. And yet they still, to be honest, they still were like, yeah, that's okay. and they approved it. So I think this says more about the Soviet government than it does about the T-34 as a tank. These are issues that could have been fixed. But at the time, they were like, oh yeah, some shrapnel killed the dummy commander in the turret. That's okay. We approve this design. It's like, okay, well, you don't want to take a minute to fix that before you approve the design? We finally got through the development. Okay, they not bad. Overall, it's actually not bad. They're going through everything very surface level, which, I mean, that's fair. I don't know. So far, nothing has actually been totally wrong. Well, except for the other things that I have corrected so far.
That T-34 you ordered has finally arrived at the dealership. It's got that lovely brand new tank smell, and you can't wait to go for a spin and perhaps do some donuts in the car park. Or maybe if you're more like me, you just want to make sure that the child seat fits in the back.
He's a dad. That's funny.
Slap its roof like a good tank
Oh my
salesman.
god, no, please don't. That meme is from fucking 2017, dude. Don't do this right now. It's not even the T-34 variant of this bad boy can fit so much blunt smoke in it. Bro, what the fuck are you talking about? Hello, fellow children. I don't know if this was this guy or the editor, but somebody needs to be fired for this.
Early T-34 models were 2.4.
That's a T-34-85. That is not an early model, which that therefore affects the height. So the height they're talking about is wrong, because this is a late model.
Only 4 crew members.
Silly boys.
These engines had first been designed and developed in 1933 at another factory in
Yeah, 33. A long fucking time the engine was worked on.
The following year, it was deemed worthy of the T-34, entering mass production at factory number 75 in June 1940. Mass-produced specimens were of lesser quality than the test prototypes, but Factory 75 guaranteed they could run for 150 hours.
Yeah.
In reality,
the engine was...
World War II V2 engines had an average lifespan of 100 hours, one of the many issues with the T-34. Another aspect...
the engine, and again, they spent all this time working on it, and then, when it went into mass production, they had to make a shit ton of compromises, just like with the T-34. It's not just the T-34 itself that they have to cut down on, they also cut down on the components. And so they spent all this time finally getting the engine to run, decently reliably. I think he said 250. I had read somewhere, I think they got it up to 300 hours.
The gun mounted on T-34s was the L11 model with a caliber of 76.2 millimeters or 3 inches. Fortunately, a better gun was already in development, the F-34 model. This weapon also boasted a 76.2 mm.
They wanted the F-32 first. I'll say this. They hated the L-11, not just because of its poor penetration qualities, or it wasn't that bad, actually. What they really didn't like about the L-11 was the ergonomics of it. The breech continually failed to return to battery, and it was a very unsafe gun, and it was also a bitch to disassemble and maintain. And they wanted it replaced with the F-32, but it took so long to get the F-32 going that by the time they could, the F-34 existed, so they were like, fuck it, let's just jump. Fuck the F-32, let's just go straight to the F-34. But yes, I mean, the in practice, they went from the L-11 to the F-34. So yes, but there was a middle gap. And again, a 76 millimeter gun in 1940 on your main medium tank is pretty fucking good.
Designer Koshkin devised a small turret with steeply sloped sides. This made it...
But again, that's the 85. That's the bigger turret. That's the one that was good. The designers continuously requested that they widen the turret. You can read it, and it's in my T-34 video. I quote it, where the factory says, "Can we widen the turret?" And the ABTU comes back and says, "Yeah, you can widen the turret, just as long as you don't change the turret." Russia just had a really bad communication issue with all of their departments.
The turret had a positive aspect, though. It was fitted with an MB-20 electric motor, which allowed it to perform a complete 360-degree turn in just 10 seconds. Perhaps the most...
Faster than the Sherman, by the way. Sherman could do a 360 in 13 seconds. The Soviet electrical motors were kind of crazy. I think just because like there was no regulation. Like I think on a lot of other electrical motors in tanks, like they were fine-tuned to get like a nice like ratio of speed, acceleration, and it's like in Sprocket when you slide the slider to the maximum speed your turret can turn, and then how long it takes the turret to reach that maximum speed. You can adjust those sliders. I think the Soviets just like went full on acceleration, and they were like, fuck it. Because I've seen like you can find in the Chieftain's Hatch, and you can find tank archives. Peter Samsonov, he did a demonstration inside of a T-34, and you can see them traversing the turret with that power traverse, and it is like you push the handle and it's and it just goes, and you let go of the traverse and it keeps spinning for like it's got momentum and it keeps going. Like it's just so loose but so fast. And I think that was just the Soviets were just like fuck it, like just slap it in there, just get it going.
Almost 1.8 inches of steel, and not just any steel. This was a special alloy called MZ2, developed by the researchers at the Mariupol factory. This alloy
Soviet steel development was actually really good. They just kept heat treating it way too much. There were a lot of really interesting developments in like the Soviet factories, like not Pioneer, but I just remember like they introduced arc welding in their factories, and that was like a huge time saver for them. They developed a lot of really interesting and cool alloys, and they had some really cool technology. Like I think they were one of the first people to do the thing where like you see it today, you see it a lot nowadays. It's like a wire mesh structure, and the tank is held inside of it, and the structure can like rotate and like it spins the tank. I think the Soviets were some of the first people to do that. So like there were a lot of breakthroughs, I suppose, in the technology, but they just, again, they were being invaded and they had to cut for time a lot of stuff out. Baptism by fire. That's correct.
Right, okay, so on June the 22nd, 1941, Germany and its allies invaded the Soviet Union, and it was time for the T-34 to
Operation Barbarossa.
From the very start, modern German.
That's an
tanks,
F2 or a G. That's a
Panzer.
That's a late model Panzer IV that shouldn't be here.
The T-34 seemed to outclass its foes, and yet the early stages of Barbarossa were marked by decisive Axis victories. To put it simply, the T-34 was not a wonder weapon, far from it. And
it was being used wrong. It wasn't just the tank, it was being used wrong.
But what mostly let the crews down were the mechanical failures. Their transmission failed so frequently, the crews took to carrying a spare.
That's a myth. That is blatantly false. That is a blatantly false myth. If you actually try to look up, you can find photos of a T-34 carrying its transmission on its engine deck. However, every single photo is of the exact same tank. There is only one photographed tank that has ever actually carried its transmission on its butt. It was more so it wasn't even the transmission that much too. It was the clutch. The clutch and the steering levers on the T-34 were fucking god awful because they were designed to be used with pneumatic steering and a lot of these other like fancy technologies. But because of what happened in the stress of Germany invasion, they had to cut down on all of that like big time.
The gearbox got stuck more often than not, to which tankers responded a sledgehammer. Every single time I ask about that with anyone, they always say no. And I've also never read it anywhere. I've only ever heard the sledgehammer thing as a myth on like Reddit or on Discord or on whatever. Like people say it, but I have never seen a single academic data point that supports it. Even when I was in Canada and I was specifically wanted to talk to the guys at the Ottawa Museum, they had a T-34-85 there. And I wanted to ask the museum guys, like, you know, as people who get to work on this tank every single day and you guys get to drive it and do mechanics on it, you know, how is it? And we asked about the sledgehammer and they said no. They said we have never needed a sledgehammer to drive this thing. Then they remarked how difficult it was to change gears. They remarked how heavy the steering levers are, which I have heard a million times. But there's academic data points supporting that and also accounts. Yeah, the whole sledgehammer thing, I've never been able to verify that. Little to no practical experience of how to maneuver large tank formations, leaving them as easy prey to the Axis armored spearheads. As a result, the invaders quickly encircled the armored units of the Special Western Military District, defeating them by July the 8th, 1941.
Rest in peace. Yeah, Soviet tank doctrine was a fucking nightmare. I've talked about it on a different reaction video, actually.
German, the T-34, on the other hand, remains largely unchanged, except for some limited improvements. For example, the turret design was improved by adding an extra escape hatch, and the front armor was increased from 1.8 to almost 3 inches, or 75 millimeters. Engineers also added external fuel tanks, extending the range by 50%. It was only
There was a lot more done to the T-34 than that. I wouldn't say it experienced minimal changes. I mean, they upped the armor he already mentioned, but they slowly and steadily made ergonomic improvements. They implemented a lot of the features that they wanted but had to get rid of. I wouldn't say that like between the invasion and 1943, you know, before they do the 85, I wouldn't say that it experienced minimal changes. Like they did a lot.
Only at the end of 1943, however, that the T-34 was equipped with a more powerful weapon. This was the new 85mm gun, which replaced the previous 76mm.
85mm,
specifically
my beloved.
designed to knock out the recently introduced Panther tanks. The gun had been adapted.
The 85 was chosen because of the Tiger, not the Panther.
It had a muzzle velocity.
At least for the IS it was. I'd imagine the T-34 was the same.
Feet per second. In 1942 alone, the Red Army lost some 15,000 tanks, of which the majority were T-34s. The Soviet industrial complex, however...
Well, yeah, because that was the majority of tanks they had.
Armaments factories were dismantled and then reassembled piece by piece east of the Urals, far from the Wehrmacht's reach.
An incredible technological achievement, by the way, or at least that's an incredible engineering achievement. To take all your they literally pulled the Patrick Star. They took all their factories and pushed them somewhere else. That's insane.
But they still came out on top. This was a matter of numbers, but it wasn't just numbers. By
yeah,
this
I was about to
stage,
say.
Red Army commanders had learned, or rather relearned, the lessons of Marshal Tukhachevsky and knew how to make the best use of large armored units consisting of fast medium tanks. This was
Also, Germany in 1943 is not doing too hot. And then 1944, they're doing even worse. And in 1945, they lost. And I think that's why you saw such a dramatic shift. Because, like, you think about a lot of wars where, like, a lot of times it ends in a stalemate. Like World War I even, right? It ends in a stalemate. Or not ends in a stalemate, but, like, there's a stalemate for a long time. Or an offensive that fails. And then when the other side tries to counteroffensive, the guys who were initially attacking start defending and they actually like chill out for a while. And then now you kind of end up like in this weird middle ground where nobody's actually doing good. What happened in World War II was that not only, as the invasion continued, not only did the Soviets learn and slowly recover and get better because they bought themselves the time to do that, but also Germany got worse. So by the time the tables were turned in 1943, it was like once that exponential line had been crossed, the Germans getting their asses handed to them. But even still, the Germans held out for a long time, like in the defensive.
Of newly produced
That's worth
T-34s.
commending, I think.
Production lines continued to crank out some 30,000 tanks between the end of the war in 1949.
Mass production, my beloved.
The medium tank was replaced by a newer model, the T-54.
Well, it was replaced by the T-44 first, but then, yes, the T-54 after that. Which, by the way, I find it funny. If you look at the T-44 versus the T-34, the T-44 is basically a T-34, but they got rid of all the sloping on the sides. Which is so, I just love, whenever people bring up, like, the T-34 was amazing because of its sloped armor. The Russians love sloped armor. It's like, yeah, but, well, then how come the minute they had time to actually design a new tank to replace the T-34, the one change they made was they got rid of the side slopes. The front slope is great, but the side slopes are not. Which, by the way, the Sherman had done that from day one.
So, let's now return to today's initial question. What definition can best sum up the legacy of the T-34? Was it a piece of junk, or was it a formidable weapon?
Both.
And the answer is really that it's neither. When it was first released, the T-34
I would say it's both.
The best
Both is a more positive outlook. Neither is a more negative outlook.
medium tank in the world, at least as far as its gun and armor are concerned.
Yeah, best medium tank in the world. IDK about that one, Chief.
550 T-34s were produced. But on the other hand, we know
insane.
that a T-34 could be knocked out of
Bro, they ended up making,
even
how many total T-34s were built? Like 80,000? That's fucking insane.
before entering
that's
combat as a result of
crazy.
mechanical failure. In fact, out of those 54,000 some tanks that we mentioned a minute ago, a total of 44,900 were irrecoverable losses, which is 82%. Those numbers may convey...
I've never heard that. If that's true, that's
messages.
insane.
Right, look at those figures and think, well, it looks like the Soviets sure lost a lot of tanks. But you might also think...
Yeah,
sure,
they did.
But it looks like they were able to quickly and consistently replenish their losses. From this perspective, the T-34 was plagued by several flaws, and it was technically inferior to many of its adversaries. As a result, it never achieved a better than 1 to 3 kill-loss ratio. But a tank should be judged also on a strategic level. In other words, its capability to win a war. From this point of view,
yes,
the T-34
definitely
was definitely a winning tank, thus overpowering the Axis invaders by tanks whose quality was satisfactory at best, but whose quantity was absolutely overwhelming.
Okay, I think that says more about the Soviet Union as a nation, as an economy, as a military, more so than the tank. Like, yeah, the tank was good for that, but like, I do think I do want to use this video to say something, because like the video was talking about like a tank should be judged on its strategic abilities and everything too. People say, yeah, the tank sucked, but they could build a heck of a lot of them, and yes, that's true. But also, this might be controversial, but like, tanks don't win wars. Like, having a really good tank, you don't instantly win a war doing that. You have infantry, you have air power, you have the economy, you have support from home, you have allies, you have the enemy's will and the enemy's version of all those things to compare to. What is it? Sun Tzu says that a war is won before it is even fought, or something like that, or like a battle is won before it's even begun, something like that. I think anything that you can say, like things that were good about the T-34, I think you can also copy paste that onto the Soviet Union as a nation at that time. The tank is the reflection of the nation that builds it. I wouldn't say that like just because a tank can be produced in mass numbers and is cheap, that instantly means that you can win a war with it, or vice versa. Just because you have a tank that's like got all this superior tech and is like really cool doesn't instantly mean that you'll win a war. Like, you also have to have infantry who knows what the fuck they're doing. You got to have good equipment and good training and good doctrine all around. You can't just have like one good tank and expect to win with that. Well, I'm sure the chat is happy to see that the video is now over. Not as bad of a video as I actually thought it was going to be, but obviously I have a lot of nitpicking with... I can do nitpicking all day and all night. Someone out there on their team did some research somewhere. Now we can play Alien Isolation. Remember to like and sub. Yeah, remember to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed that little react thing. If you guys want to see more of that. We actually stayed at pretty high viewership the whole time, so I appreciate that. That being said, it's time to get spooky. Because the whole point of the stream was to do Alien Isolations. So